Robert Maginnis, a retired U.S. Army officer and an experienced military analyst with on-the-ground experience in inside Russia and Ukraine, and the author of the book Kings of the East. Lieutenant, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you for joining us this morning.
I'm glad to be with you, Anthony.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to meet you, sir. I know you've come on many times before. So, first of all, thank you for your service. We all appreciate it very, very much. And I have some real questions for you. This is troubling. I spoke a little bit before about this leaked information and the circumstances surrounding it. So, Colonel, could you tell us, they now know the identity of the person that has revealed the information, 21-year-old Jack Teixeira. And let me ask you a question. I mean, one would think the average person that's listening, all of us, I'm the average person. I'm not military, and that's what I mean when I say average person. We would think that this is so secret, this is so important, that what does it take? What kind of abilities did this man have to be able to infiltrate the Pentagon?
Well, there's a worldwide network of intelligence material, Anthony, that, even National Guardsmen in Massachusetts, with the right access, security clearance, can download that material. What he was looking at and what he eventually shared from what the media reports are finished intelligence products that are going to be circulated on these various secure nets. And then he evidently downloaded them and took some of them home, and then, of course, eventually over time shared them on the Internet with some of his friends, his buddies, to either boast or some other reason. So it's unfortunate, but the New York Times picked up on it because it was in it ended up really in some of it on Twitter. But I suppose it's good news. There's no foreign intelligence penetration here, but the bad news is that some of this material got into the open, and now it's being used by our friends and adversaries for their advancement. So it is an issue. It is a danger.
Yeah, it's a danger to our country.
Well, it is. Of course, most of these products were focused on Ukraine, and some of the reporting, though, Anthony, is rather hyperbolic in that, it's really not going to alter what's going on in Ukraine at the present time. Most of the information was pretty well known or suspected. This is not similar to what we saw with Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden before, where there was a big trove. There was no new classified program that was identified by what's been reported in the media. So, there will be some damage. Allies will be more cautious about sharing with the U.S., which is a problem. And, of course, the intelligence organizations in the U.S. will clamp down on that sharing. And we did call out some of our allies, the South Koreans, the Egyptians, and others, and so there will be some diplomatic challenges as well. But I think the larger issue that most Americans who read this that don't have any background with this sort of stuff is that, are we being lied to?
Yeah, and, exactly.
And I think that we do need to be cautious. There is reason to believe that in the past we've been lied to. Presidents have a history. FDR lied to us about going to World War II. Wilson lied to us about going to World War I. And JFK lied to us about intervention in Cuba because they were making plans. LBJ lied about Vietnam and cost us many more lives. Bush lied about WMD. James Polk lied about claiming Mexico invaded the U.S., and, of course, we went into war with Mexico. William McKinley lied about who sunk the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, and, of course, that led to the Spanish-American War. So, presidents lie. I know that may shock some people, but the reality is you look at these documents and you say, what is Mr. Biden telling us about this war? Is it really the storyline that we're hearing in the news, or if there's something darker behind it? And so I would understand being rather suspicious of with this revelation as to what really is going on.
Yeah, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that they're making more of the 21-year-old who clearly, listen, he broke the law. There's no question, and let the court system and the law play that out. But it's so focused on that as opposed to what you just talked about. Do we have troops on the ground? Do we have Americans that are actually fighting Russian soldiers? I mean, am I overestimating that, or is that not a big issue for us?
No, that's all about deflection. And if you're only reporting on the leaker and not on the substance of the leak and whether or not it's true, and if it is true, you will understand that clearly the Russians know the ground truth. The Ukrainians know the ground truth, and the senior leadership of Western Europe will know that as well. Because if, in fact, there are special operators that are behind the scenes, kind of as a ventriloquist, kind of manipulating things on the ground, a lot of people know. And unfortunately, the mainstream media is only reporting, in most cases, what the Biden administration and the Pentagon are telling them. And if these reports are contrary to that, then we need to be concerned. Because I went through a whole list, and there are far more that presidents historically have lied to the American people about their motivations and what really is happening in the front lines.
Well, it seems to me there's more lying with our presidents and our politicians than anything. I mean, it's almost at a point where if they tell the truth, it's by accident. I mean, I don't. It's scary at some point. I mean, do presidents feel? I guess they do, that they can't give the information because they think, why is it everybody feels like they're more important or they're smarter than the American public? And, if you reveal something, I think they think that somehow it's going to cause a problem. So therefore, they justify it or rationalize it in their own minds and say, well, we can't tell the public what's really going on, so we'll just keep it to ourselves. Is that the way the military, deals with it, with the presidents?
Well, keep in mind, I have significant insight, at least in two wars, Vietnam. A good friend of mine who is now deceased, General Charlie Cooper, he was a map holder for the CNO of the Navy and the other chiefs when they went into LBJ's Oval Office. And they said, look, Mr. President, we don't want to escalate this war, and this is why. And they went through a whole litany of things as to why not. And then the President Johnson just yelled and screamed at him, cursed him out, and kicked him out of the office. He's saying you don't understand. Well, the point they didn't understand is his LBJ's political motivation depended upon the continuation of the lie that Vietnam was something different than it really ended up being. Much the same with Bush's WMD. I knew firsthand, from sources in Iraq that they didn't have WMD, and I've written about that, and so it's not a secret. These types of things, we need to appreciate the fact that, unfortunately, there are motivations behind the scenes that are rather focused on the man in the White House, that if you're not careful, they lie about things. And even presidents that we have great confidence in, Ronald Reagan lied about, the whole Iran issue. And there are other presidents who've lied about other things over the years. And it has resulted, arguably, in the loss of significant life and treasure. And so we come to the present situation, and this president routinely, has gaffes, and he doesn't seem to really have total control over the topics in which he speaks. If he doesn't have a teleprompter, he can't speak. And so, somebody behind the scenes is manipulating things. Now, you can argue that with, $32 billion in kinetic weapons going to Ukraine today, that there's something going on here. That's far more than twice what the Europeans are sending, and yet overall, we have about $120 billion we've sent to that country. Is this really an existential threat to the U.S.? And also, are we detracting our efforts from the true existential threat, which is coming from the Pacific and the Chinese? Those are key questions that ought to be asked, and unfortunately, this is being covered up to a large degree, arguably, by mainstream media that's focused on this 21-year-old who committed a crime by releasing this information. But he released mostly finished intelligence analysis that would have ended up in the Oval Office informing the president, and the president is evidently suggesting something that perhaps is not in line with what the intelligence is suggesting.
So the question, Colonel, is what they're telling us, the mainstream media, that Ukraine is winning. They're winning. Is this information that's been leaked sort of dispute that?
Well, it certainly brings it into question. You know, I can't argue. I haven't seen the actual intelligence. I'm only reading what I'm reading, and also happen to understand how this system works. There's a lot of munitions. I understand it talks about the deplenishment of significant munitions, the numbers of casualties, the positioning of forces on the ground, and really the intent that is analyzed of senior leaders over there. And so when you put all that together, if in fact they're painting a picture that is contrary to what the president is saying, and his mouthpiece to some of the mainstream media outlets is different, then you really need to question. As I said, LBJ lied to us, Bush lied to us, and they used the media to help fan that lie. So I would hope that Mr. Biden is not lying to us, because it's going to continue to exacerbate issues that we have internationally, and it could lead us into a war that none of us wants.
Yeah, that's for sure. Colonel, China indicated they will not sell arms to either side in the war between Russia and Ukraine. But are there other ways that China could aid Russia? Just not by means of weaponry, but other ways that you think they could, or they are helping the Ukraine in this battle?
Well, don't believe anything the Chinese tell you.
Oh, well, that's for sure.
That's the first principle.
Right.
The second one is they've been aiding Russia by buying all their energy that they otherwise would have sold to Europe, and, of course, a lot of foodstuffs. The Chinese can't feed themselves, so they have to import. And they're also using their proxies like Iran and North Korea to sell munitions, evidently. There's been plenty of reports of Iranian drones being used against Ukraine, 155 ammunition fired by Russian howitzers that came from North Korea is a report. There are other reports out there that suggest that, yes, Russia is aiding, or China is aiding and abetting the Russians in their fight against Ukraine. And probably it's far more extensive than what I outlined, and we haven't seen anything in the public press that suggests that they're not. So I would kind of lean in that direction, saying yes, China's helping, and they'll continue to help. Just because years ago I wrote a book, Alliance of Evil. I believe we've been in a new Cold War for years, and it's just beginning to become very obvious.
Okay. Well, listen, Colonel, I want to thank you for your time. Once again, thank you for your service, sir. It's been very informative. I'm sure the guests and everybody listening appreciated it. Thank you, sir.
Take care. Thank you, Anthony.
Welcome back. Anthony Pope sitting in for Joe Piscopo. Donald Trump filed a $500 million lawsuit against Michael Cohen, his former attorney. Interesting turn of events, a civil lawsuit. So I brought on with us Marco LaRocca, certified civil trial lawyer in New Jersey, a very dear friend of mine, a colleague of mine, somebody I have the utmost respect for. He is a true talent in the law, and he's been gracious enough to come on this morning and talk a little bit about this. Marco, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning, Anthony. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Listen, I know you're familiar with it because I talked to you a little bit about it last night. So this is a lawsuit, as I understand it, that the former president filed against his former attorney. Confidentialities being breached, lawyer-client confidentialities, the defamation, slander. I mean, it hit him with a large, I think it was 140 paragraph, 140 different events being on the podcast and his books. But what's the reality of this? I mean, what do you think is the chances, number one, of winning this type of lawsuit, and to what end do you think it was filed?
So, Anthony, let me tell you, the fiduciary duties, the attorney-client privilege, as we know, those are sacred privileges, those are sacred rights, and on its face, that's the most glaring thing in the complaint. Having said that, as you go through the complaint, in the body of the complaint, it details that Michael Cohen signed an employment agreement which contained a confidentiality agreement at the time he took a job with Trump Organization. So it'd be interesting to see exactly what is in that employment agreement and what his restrictions are. Now, obviously, the employment agreement cannot stop, Michael Cohen from going in and testifying if he was subpoenaed in criminal matters or he doesn't give you criminal protection. But this guy, he's taking it to the next level. He's got podcasts. He's got books. He's clearly talking about things and addressing different situations that would fall within the purview of what I would anticipate that employment agreement would say. So I would say this lawsuit really has legs. I mean, I think Michael Cohen's got a problem.
Yeah, it would seem so. I mean, look, we all know about lawyer-client confidentiality. Certainly, you and I both know about that, and you take painstaking efforts to make sure that you never breach that, because generally that's something that the ethics committee will really come down on you. You agree, right?
Well, I do, but I guess in this case he's disbarred, so he doesn't really care.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And there is that exception, is there not, Marco, that if it's a matter of fraud, a crime, that there's an exception. But is that a situation where the lawyer makes that decision, or is that generally something that a court of law has to decide before someone's able to testify against the client or make these type of claims that Michael Cohen has made?
So, I mean, yes, you're 100% correct. I mean, there's the crime fraud exception, and there may be other exceptions as to communications, whether or not the former president maintains that privilege. Having said that, you're 100% right. There has to be a determination whether or not the crime fraud exception has been met, whether or not the testimony sought satisfies that concern. And it's not Michael Cohen's decision. It's not Michael Cohen's privilege. It's the client's privilege. It maintains and stays with the client until there's a determination. And you're right. We painstakingly fight that, and you continue to fight it until there's no recourse. I mean, you don't give an inch because, without that, what are we? I mean, a client has to come in. They have to trust you. And I haven't seen that happens here. I haven't seen any orders to that effect. But again, he's going way beyond that. And I mean, in his books, he's talking about various personal matters and so forth. And nobody knows better than him that the former president isn't going to sit for this and that he would file a lawsuit. So it makes me wonder what was on his mind when he did this, because they were served with cease and desist letters as it pertained to the books, and he still went ahead. And he's in a little bit of a different position than Stormy Daniels, because from everything I see, Michael Cohen appears to be a very wealthy man. And I anticipate there's, in addition to the damage clauses and anticipated damages, that there's an attorney's fee provision within that agreement. And we saw what happened to Ms. Daniels.
Yeah, that's for sure. What do you think about his attorney, Cohen's previous attorney, Mr. Costello, who had testified before the grand jury, as the press has reported? Do you think he's going to be one of the main witnesses for the former president?
I mean, it seems, based on the testimony that he gave, that he would be the ideal president, which raises a very interesting point, right? Who's going to come in and testify on behalf of the former president in this litigation? Because with the criminal proceedings going in New York, I would imagine that he's going to avail himself of the fifth at a deposition, that he's not going to engage in this type of discovery. So it raises that question. I think, Costello probably would be a key witness to move forward in this litigation.
But, that's interesting because, I mean, if the president is not prepared, the former president's not prepared, I mean, he's the plaintiff. So I'm correct, am I not, that the plaintiff always has to go first? I mean, usually in a deposition, it's always the plaintiff that's up first. So, he must have been told by his attorneys that, if you file this lawsuit, one of the first things after paper discovery is they're going to be calling you to sit down and to be deposed.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, listen, it'll play itself out. We'll see where it is, you know. But Marco, it's been informative. I thank you for coming on early in this morning, and we appreciate your insight. Thanks so much, brother.
Thank you. That's all.
Welcome back. Sitting in for Joe Piscopo. You know, we heard from the Colonel, and the Colonel was talking about how every president almost in the last 100 years has lied to us about something. The press lies, the presidents, the politicians lie. What's the real truth about the economy? Does anybody know for sure exactly what's going on? So we decided to bring on with us Jim Iuorio, Managing Director of TJM Institutional Services and a veteran futures and option trader. So Jim, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
Yeah, it's good to hear you. And we've never met before, but thank you so much. And Jim, let me ask you a question right from the start. NASDAQ, jumped 2% in the wake of reports of easing inflation. Is this to foresee the stock market only continuing to improve? Are these accurate barometers for what's really happening in our economy?
Well, no. So what the reason that the NASDAQ rallies is because inflation's coming down, but also because the other pieces of economic data we've seen over the last 2 weeks are weak and suggest we're going into a recession. So the chain of events is that if inflation is really easing and the economy is heading toward a recession, which, by the way, even the Fed has said that now that they expect a recession this year, then interest rates can go a little bit lower, and the NASDAQ really loves lower interest rates, and that's why it went higher. So over the last, let's call it 10 years for certain, 30 years really, the stock market trades not based on the fundamentals of the economy as much as it does Federal Reserve liquidity. Like if the Fed is going to inject money into the system through lower rates, through buying bonds, and that's why the stock market rallies. So it's really unfortunate. Not only is it not a good barometer, it's sometimes like a contra barometer to the actual economy.
It could be misleading, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it could be misleading. Wow, that's interesting. Do you see the stock market though to continue to improve in spite of whether there is a recession or not?
See, there's some parts of the stock market that I think are going to do really well, like metals and mining, things like that. But there are many things that I don't think will do well. I think we're in kind of a long slog with the inflation part of this because keep in mind what's happening and then kind of reflect it back to the 70s. The Fed is keeping interest rates high, while at the same time the government seems to be working exactly opposite of them to keep inflation high. Right. I don't know why. Well, I do know why they're doing this, but that's a longer show. Right. But so it could be this fight between the Fed and the federal government that goes on for several years. And if that's the case, I don't see any really broad, huge bull market in the stock market. I don't think it might be able to do okay, but I don't think we're in for anything great on the upside quite yet.
Jim, for our viewers, when inflation is high. Does that generally mean that more people are buying, so therefore the prices are going up? And when inflation is reduced, that there's less buying? Is that a correlation?
That is basically it, but that's not the way it happened this time. Remember that when we saw this big bout of inflation, yes, the government created all kinds of money and injected into the system. Milton Friedman always says that inflation is a monetary phenomenon always and everywhere. This time was a little bit different because of the supply chain being absolutely brought to a halt. So it's funny that the things we're seeing now, we're seeing a supply chain healing. We're seeing, we always say that high prices are a cure for high prices as well, meaning inflation itself starts to curtail demand, like you were just alluding to. Those two things have happened. The government has stopped giving money directly to people, and the Fed has raised interest rates. Now, the Fed raising interest rates, I don't think has much to do with the inflation coming off yet because there's a lag effect from when we feel the effects of these rate hikes. They've only been hiking rates for 13 months. The glut of them came about 9 months ago. We're probably just starting to feel those now. So the Fed's sitting back looking, going, see, we're taking care of inflation. Well, no, they're just going to take care of the economy and knock it into a recession as inflation is already coming lower, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, and what do you think about, did COVID play a part in this? I assume it did.
Well, every time someone says, did COVID play a part, I say, no, COVID restrictions and medications played a part. There's a difference. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the right way to put it. That's for sure.
The government shutting down the supply chain, that is a big deal. And then giving everybody tons of dough. It was just an absolutely asinine idea.
Yeah, that seems to be the school of thought now. But, listen, how close are we to entering a recession, do you think?
I think we're a quarter away. The funny thing is the Fed funds futures curve right now is pricing in the Fed actually starting to ease interest rates by July. I mean, it's already April. So the futures market says that we're getting close to a recession now. So I think within the next, call it 4 or 5 months is my prediction.
Yeah. But, I mean, even though that inflation is easing a little bit, it seems to, I mean, do you still consider it, though, at this point to just be too high?
Well, of course. And not only is the inflation too high, but prices don't come down when inflation eases. Like, think about a restaurant like I own in Palatine, here at Branson Palatine. We had to raise prices, obviously, because our costs went up probably about 40% in 2 years. When our costs start to come down, we don't lower prices. One, because we haven't been making as much money over the last 2 years, and two, because we don't know when the next shoe is coming to drop in the inflation picture. Sure. So the prices aren't coming down for the consumer. Just the rate of going up goes down, which is kind of sad, really.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a vicious cycle, though. You know, it just one feeds off the other one affects the other. It's very difficult for anybody to understand. I mean, I'm not an economist; I'm an attorney, and it's difficult. Sometimes I try to get a handle on it, and we appreciate someone like you with your insight. I mean, it does seem though a little bit that I've looked into gas and food has come down a little bit. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, the gas and food has definitely come down a little bit. Part of the gas coming down over was the government selling out our strategic petroleum reserves, like leaning on the price of oil and gas for the last year and a half, and now all of a sudden they're slowing down doing that, and then the Saudis decided that they were going to curtail production. Did you see gas then rallied like 6% over the last week and a half? So I think the new move in gasoline is higher now, and I think that could be a bad thing because that's that cost push inflation where the inputs of different goods go higher, and that's a harder one to deal with. So that's one of the reasons I think that although inflation is coming down, I don't think it's going away completely. And remember, there's something that's important, Anthony, is that the inflation was an intentional move by the federal government to bail out big debtor states, pensions, counties that just had too much debt. And the way to handle that debt is to monetize it by throwing more dollars into the system, making higher tax base because there's higher prices. They told us they were doing this. It's only now that they pretend like, oh, yeah, I guess we don't know what happened. They all know what happened. They did it on purpose.
Yeah, it seems that everything is done for some purpose. Generally, it's not always in the interest of the public, though.
Amen to that.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, the Biden administration, I mean, is there something they can do beyond, and I don't know that they're doing anything, quite frankly. We had a colonel on before, and it was talking about how every president, I think in modern times, has lied to us about something, whether it's war, whether it's inflation. It's very difficult to really know who's telling you the truth. You know what I mean? It seems like if they tell the truth, it's by accident. But, I mean, is there something that you, in your position, and with your knowledge and experience, that the Biden administration should be doing that they're not doing to get inflation to go down?
Of course. One of the reasons that inflation is as high as it is through onerous regulation, punitive taxation, and what they want to do now is ramp that up. Is that as soon as they see inflation, remember they were blaming the meat producers, blaming the grocers, blaming the oil companies. CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, said there'll never be another refinery built in this country again due to regulation. So an administration like this, they have no problem with other countries building refineries and working with fossil fuels, but not ours, of course. So what happens is we end up paying higher prices. They don't really help the environment anyway because it's one planet we live on, and they just move it somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, do they not realize it's global?
I don't think they care. I think Thomas Sowell, the world's greatest economist, always says that the things that work get replaced by things that sound good. And I think our politicians just want things that sound good. And we're not letting refineries be built because we're against fossil fuel. Well, guess what? The fossil fuel is like the lifeblood of our whole economy and way of life. It's like beating your head against the wall. You don't understand what the heck's going on half the time.
No, you really. I read an article the other day that it says you drive an electric car, and you have to drive at about 48,000 miles before you're carbon neutral. Because the carbon that goes into building the batteries and doing all they have to do it, you got to go like 48,000 miles before you start to see a positive effect. So, I mean, half of our country leases cars, and you don't even ever get to 48,000 miles. I haven't driven a car in 30 years that I've gone over 35 or 40,000 miles. So, what's the what's the positive effect?
Are you suggesting that their beautiful story isn't really the right story? How dare you, Anthony? No, of course you're right. I mean, you're not even throwing in the fact that mining rare earth metals, mining cobalt, mining lithium. These are all very, very environmentally negative things that happen. So there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. I've just quoted Thomas Sowell now twice in 5 minutes. I'm kind of proud of myself. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. So we have to decide what we want and move. The important thing is this notion that we're going to smash the bridge that is fossil fuels before we've built the new bridge that is renewables is really one of the most detrimental things I've ever seen to economic policy, and that's what they seem to be forging ahead with. It really, again, I don't understand unless they just don't care about causing as many problems as they can in order to blame it on the other side and then act like they're trying to fix things.
It seems that there's just a group of folks that they have a position, they take a position, but they don't really ever look at the consequences. What is the end game? I think they just get an idea in mind. This is better. Listen, everybody realizes that if you didn't have too much CO2 in the air, it's not a bad thing. If we had no plastic in the oceans, it's not a bad thing. But what's the end result? How do you get there? What's the cost of it? And instead of going just full out the way they're doing it, you would think there would be some middle ground to it. But that's the problem we seem to be having in general. There's never a middle ground. It's either all one way or all the other way.
And Anthony, too, the thing about the environment, the environment is very important to conservatives. Conservatives should take that issue back. Conservation and conservatism are right. They're the same word. And you want to know where the crossover is? You go to a Ducks Unlimited meeting, somewhere people that are hunters and want a pristine environment. We want a pristine environment. We just think their way of going about it is stupid and counterproductive.
Yeah, no, I agree. Jim, listen, it's been informative. I thank you so much. It was good meeting you. And thank you, my friend. You be well.